Enterprise, a partnership between my company, Digital Venture Partners, and Black Enterprise, where every week we have a conversation with a prominent Black cannabis executive that we feel like is creating inroads to more progress for people of color to come into the space, and more importantly, setting examples of how to do it. Today with me, I have Steve Hawkins, the Executive Director of the Marijuana Policy Project, a man who's been steeped in public policy, social advocacy, and Black progress for decades. So it's a true honor to have you on to share your insight today.
Thanks for having me on, Andrew.
So before we hop into just the cannabis conversation, the state of cannabis today, you have a very decorated history of doing what you do outside of cannabis. So could you give us an idea of what you did before you jumped into the space?
Sure. I started my career as a civil rights lawyer, worked throughout the Deep South, worked on a lot of death penalty cases, defending folks of color on death row. I worked as well with the national NAACP and worked in the human rights field as well. So I did all that before I came to cannabis.
So touching on like your NAACP experience, as someone who grew up in the Deep South, and it's always been such a prestigious and well-regarded industry for just Black advocacy and progress, what did you learn during your time there on how to exactly position the Black experience to move forward in whatever regards you're focusing on?
Well, I think I learned from my NAACP years is that, while we've made so much progress as a people, there is so much still to be done, and so many opportunities that we cannot afford to miss. And in many ways, that's what led me to cannabis. I saw that we still had, at that point, like 500,000 people arrested every year for cannabis possession. The civil rights attorney in me knows that if those many people are being arrested, probably 10 times that number are being stopped and harassed by the police on during the course of the year. So I wanted to make sure that we could really tackle that and get to the point where I think we should get, where no one is being arrested for cannabis possession, because what we know is that that people of color, black and brown youth, are 4 times more likely to be stopped. States like Montana and Kentucky, it's 10 times more likely. But I also got involved, Andrew, because this is a unique opportunity. This is an industry that is going to be built in our lifetime. And right now it's created 300,000 jobs in the United States. It's going to create another 700,000. And these are going to be good paying jobs within the industry, and then jobs outside of the industry, whether you're, a law firm or a technician or security, right? There's going to be so many opportunities in the cannabis space, both as an entrepreneur to have a license and to grow or process or and be involved in retail. And then within the industry itself, there will be just so many opportunities for employment.
Right. And what are some of the similarities and contrasts in your history as like a civil rights attorney coming into like a heavily regulated industry? It's kind of a consumer packaged good. It's kind of a pharmaceutical, right? It's kind of a criminal justice conversation. Like, what was some of the nuance that you had to adapt once you came into the cannabis space, even though you have decades of experience?
Well, what's interesting about the cannabis space is that we have all of the issues around business, right? Like just an industry trying to make it, even though we have 18 states that have legalized, we still see it illegal at the federal level. So you have all that happening, but at the same time, we still see discrimination, right? We still see racial justice and police misconduct all in this space, right? This is one of the main ways that the police have for example, over these, 5 decades since cannabis was put on the same schedule with heroin back in 1970 by President Nixon, that this has been one of the ways that the police have had constant contact with our communities, right? And that has its consequences, right? We have seen instances where people have been stopped and searched by the police, and those encounters have gone have ended up with people being killed. So so we have all of that in this space, this connection between business, right, trying to grow an industry and make sure that people of color have opportunities, but also understanding how law enforcement and the discrimination within and the stigma around cannabis has been costly to Black lives. I can give you the example of Sha'Carri Richardson, right? Denied her opportunity in the to participate in last summer's Olympics. All of that growing out of how the U.S. has helped to define cannabis as this illegal substance, right? So, so for me as a civil rights, somebody who comes out of a civil rights background, I see a lot of the complexities here, but see a lot of opportunities too, and that's what has really brought me to this work.
So can we talk about the importance of policy? I think a lot of our people, we're kind of just like, well, eventually they'll legalize it and then I'll start on it, or they don't really understand the context of how these programs are rolled out in particular states or markets, et cetera, et cetera. Why is it important for the aspiring entrepreneur or professional to pay attention to what's happening in their state and what the verbiage is in these new laws?
Right. So, we will continue to see new states legalize cannabis either for adult use or medical use. If you have any interest in being involved in the industry, and you should, because this is an industry that right now is likely to do 20 billion plus this year in revenue. It'll grow to $80 billion a year. To put that to put it in context, the entire National Football League is about $24 billion industry. Cannabis will surpass that most likely by, if not this year, next. So people should be paying attention to what's happening in their state. Apply for license opportunities that arise. Look at where the jobs will be. So Andrew, I can look at New York State, right, that just created all of these opportunities for Black entrepreneurs, right? It's a great opportunity to come into a state where there's going to be all sorts of potential either to grow or to process or to open up dispensaries. But that's all on what we call the plant touching side. But I want to see the Black law firm that's going to become, the experts in applying license for helping people apply for licenses, becoming experts on regulations, within the state. I want to see the Black security firm or those folks who want to be involved with a transportation. So there's a lot of needs within the cannabis industry, and as it comes online, people have to be paying attention to the policies that are happening in their state. So when you hear that the governor is going to be signing a bill to legalize cannabis, that's the time to get involved, not 5 years later.
So let's go into the Marijuana Policy Project. Can you give us an idea of how you got involved with them? And as someone who is so accomplished and so esteemed in your field, what made this particular organization say, this is where I'm going to stake my flag and this is where I feel like I can build the bridge towards progress?
I've spent a lot of my career working on criminal justice reform. whether it's been reentry, helping returning citizens get housing and be able to vote, or working on sentencing reduction or parole. All of that, though, is the back end, right? All of that is downstream. And I wanted to be involved more upstream, right? Because cannabis being, is really the entry point for a lot of people into the criminal justice system. This is where people first get their first arrest on their records, and so I wanted to really tackle the problem upstream. And I also wanted to be able to do something about police reform, because, cannabis, the scent of cannabis has been used by the police as a pretext to stop and search people of color for decades. And now, as we see laws come onto the books that legalize cannabis, what's also happening is that the police are being stopped from using the scent of cannabis alone to stop and search people. That is tremendous progress. And so all of that brought me to the Marijuana Policy Project, because I want to work on changing the laws with respect to cannabis. I think that the medicinal value of the plant is extremely well known at this point, and I want to make sure that every state in the country offers medical use for patients. And then I want to be able to address equity in the industry. I want to be able to stop the policing of cannabis in our communities, and I want to make sure that there are job opportunities created in this new industry. So all of that brought me to the Marijuana Policy Project.
Yeah, and I think you touched it right on the head. People aren't paying attention to how many jobs, how many well-paying jobs this industry is creating, and how, as you stated earlier, you can pivot your exact skill set or knowledge base over to the space. There's this huge misconception amongst Black and brown people who come up to me, and I'm sure you get the same, where it's like, oh man, how do I open a dispensary? How do I start a farm or a cultivation center? And I tell them, it's like, whatever you're making money doing or you're passionate about now, a company in cannabis needs that exact thing, right? And it's just a matter of creating that bridge to where we come over with information and context and understand our value. So I agree 100% on your statement. I think in January you started the U.S. Cannabis Council.
That's
am I correct? So can you give me an idea of kind of what was the thought process and the mission around this organization in particular that you just started this year?
Sure. So the U.S. Cannabis Council is a collection of some of the largest companies in the country, key advocacy organizations like the Marijuana Policy Project, and then some of the trade groups within the space. We came together because we realized that we needed to have a more collective and powerful voice, especially in our Congress. We will see some change in legislation this year. Hopefully some positive developments will come out of this Congress. So we wanted to be really best positioned to be able to take advantage and to see that change happen.
Hey, great. And before we hopped on, you were telling me a little bit about the importance of banking reform for cannabis companies. Could you give our viewers an idea of kind of what's the state of how a cannabis company can bank today and why that inhibits so many small and minority-owned cannabis companies in the space?
Yeah, right now, because cannabis is illegal at the federal level, regular banks that folks know about, like whether it's Citibank or Chase or any of the others, or your local bank, they cannot do business with the cannabis industry because cannabis is still considered a dangerous drug at the federal level. So because of that, people literally have to do business with cash, or the few small banks that do offer accounts literally will charge thousands of dollars a month just to keep the account. This doesn't hurt the bigger players, right? The big companies in the space, because they can afford to pay $5,000 a month for a checking account. Who it hurts are folks of color that have smaller operations that they'd like to see grow. They can't, not only can't they open a checking account, they can't get a bank loan. They can't take their own paycheck comes in the form of cash, which is dangerous. Sometimes folks have trouble even depositing their own money into a bank because they'll ask, well, where do you work? And then that becomes a strike against you. Folks have had trouble getting mortgages. I've heard that folks have had trouble even when their children go to college and they fill out the financial aid forms. Red flags go off because you're involved in the cannabis industry. So these are all reasons why we have to deal with banking. And right now, Senator Booker and Schumer are helping to lead efforts in Congress to end federal prohibition, and that's incredibly important. But we have to make sure that we get banking regularized, right? So that anybody in the industry can bank, and most importantly, to make sure that operators of color, whether they have a dispensary or they're involved in growing or processing of the plant, that they're able to just bank regularly and not have to pay outrageous amounts of money just to have an account, and also just to be able, and this is really important, to be able to take advantage of what banks can offer, right? It's very, very hard for our folks to grow their businesses now because they can't apply for simple bank loans, right? And so it could be such a game changer just to have banking.
Great. And moving into the next year, into 2022, and cannabis is such a unpredictable industry, but as someone like yourself who's a professional and a student to the industry, what would you tell our viewers to kind of be paying attention to it, and what you may personally be excited or intrigued about that could happen over the next year or so?
I want our folks to certainly pay attention to banking, because if Congress allows cannabis businesses to bank, we're going to see real opportunities grow for Black entrepreneurs in this space. I want folks to pay attention to several states. Maryland, Rhode Island are quite likely to legalize over the next year or two. And I want folks to certainly pay attention to developments that are happening in their own states, particularly states that have legalized, because there are the next round of licenses that will be offered. But you said something earlier, Andrew, that's so important. Whatever you're doing now for your job, you don't have to start a dispensary. If you're a graphic artist, there is a need for graphic artists in the cannabis industry. If you're an accountant, right, I want to see the top cannabis businesses in the United States have Black CFOs, Black chief operating officers, Black CEOs. I want to see the head of marketing at leading companies be folks of color. I want to see the folks who pick up the plant and distribute it to the local outlets who are involved in the transportation or the security that's entailed. There are so many there. If you have a business in any of those areas, or a talent in any of those, this is a fast-growing industry where you can start as entry level today, and 5 years from now be running a department. And last thing to say on it, Andrew, is that as these companies begin to offer the potential for stock options, cannabis still right now is not traded publicly. But when that happens, there are folks who will hold on, who will have some stock options that will, this is an industry that's going to create a lot of millionaires down the road. Just like the tech industry may have not have paid people what they could have got elsewhere, but gave them stock options. That's what people need to be looking at here, because you may get paid a little bit less, but if you can get some stock options for the future, go for it.
Yeah, I concur. I actually was reading a few months ago about a guy when Netflix first started, he took half of his salary in company stock and everyone laughed at him. Needless to say, he came out on the right side of history. But we speak as Black professionals when we try to encourage people to come into the space optimistically, right? But I like to also touch on like the worst case scenario. What happens, Steve, if our people don't pay attention, if they allow this industry to get built without us and we try to come to the party late? Like what could happen if we are not as involved as we could be as this continues to roll forward?
Well, then we're going to miss those opportunities that come with being there at the beginning, right? And it's going to be, Andrew, like being late to the party with the tech industry, right? Where not everybody had to know how to code, but there were other jobs that the stories about the secretary at Facebook who like had some stock and now is retired or early. So folks have to realize that this is going to be an industry that's going to grow from really where it is now and skyrocket over the next decade. And so if you have an opportunity to participate, do. And do not think or feel that this is somehow a stigma to be involved in the cannabis industry. I think sometimes our people are missing the opportunity because they feel, well, this is cannabis, this is something that I'm going to be ashamed of and all that kind of stuff. But look, this is a plant that has medicinal values to it. This is a growing market, and don't you don't want to be second guessing yourself 5 years from now, because then it will be too late, right? This is and what we know is that 70% of the American public support legalization. People, we're seeing sort of a decline in the alcohol and beer industry, and more people are going to use cannabis, right? And you don't have to smoke it. There's edibles and things like that. So it is going to be a large industry, $80 to $100 billion, and it's not even halfway around that track yet. So folks need to really think about opportunities in this space, because they're gonna generate wealth generation that for people who come in early will be able to retire early.
I've seen it already, even with Weed Maps going publicly a couple of months ago. A couple of friends of mine who were there earlier, like they moved to Texas last year so they wouldn't have to pay state taxes. They already knew they were about to be set for life. So I've seen it with my own eyes. And to your other point, don't be afraid of the difficult conversations with your friend and family about working in the space, because after I had to tell my grandma, I was like, that was the only difficult conversation I had to have. But even she was receptive to it, once I really laid it out to her and helped her understand that, like, it's a new era and it's not the stigmas attached to it and so on and so forth. But Steve, I definitely appreciate your time that you took out to share your knowledge and the information that you've gained over your years of experience. I would love for you to leave our viewers with where they can follow you and the Marijuana Policy Project online, or where they could reach out to you directly if they have any questions.
Sure. So please follow Marijuana Policy Project. Our website is mpp.org. And you can follow me certainly on Twitter at Stephen W. Hawkins, and look forward to hearing from you all.
Thank you so much for your insight. You know, we need more men and women like yourself in the space who just bring their knowledge, their expertise, and their love for the human experience into the space. So I commend you on everything you're doing. It's an honor to have a conversation with you, Steve.
All right. Thank you.